Alright, we're going to start off lesson 2 of Hiragana with D. And here's how we write it. So, how can we remember D? Well, first of all, let's talk about the sound D. So, you may know that L and R, those sounds don't exist in Japanese the way they do in English. There's no L sound exactly, there's no R sound. There's really no equivalent to L or R, even the Spanish versions of L and R. They don't exist in Japanese. There's something totally different. And that sound is, if we do all of the syllables, which I'll just pronounce now, not just D, but da, di, do, de, do, da, di, do, de, do. That's all 5 of them, da, di, do, de, do. Those are the 5 syllables that have the Japanese R sound in it, this D sound. What is that sound? Well, the really good news is that there are 2 languages in the world that I know of which actually have this sound. One is Japanese and the other is American English. So if you can pronounce English like an American, you can say words like better, or bitter, or water, or biddy, for example. Now in a more proper British sounding dialect, that would be something more like Walter or Beta, that sort of thing, right? You pronounce the T kind of clearly. And other accents and dialects do different things. But when we say the word, let's say biddy, let's do that. So like itty bitty, right? So there's biddy. If you're saying biddy, you're not saying a T sound, the way that we normally understand a T sound. We're not saying bitty. That's really emphasizing it. We say biddy. And when we say biddy, what's going on? Well, if we do this, so this is a profile of the mouth. If we do a cutaway of the mouth, this is something what it would look like. So here is the front of the face, a person's nose would be here, and lips, and here's the 2 teeth, the incisors. So, right behind the top teeth is something called the alveolar ridge. It's just a really fancy name for the part that's behind your front teeth. And when we say a word like biddy, instead of a T sound, the tongue is striking right there. And that spot right there. Biddy. Say it with me. Biddy. Biddy. So say biddy 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 biddy. And what I want you to do is be able to say biddy 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 diddy d d. Be able to say that sound without actually having a vowel that comes before it. D. And that's this D right here. Or rather, that's this D. D D. Just like that. And it's a really cool trick because suddenly you'll be able to pronounce it perfectly. When you say D, I know it sounds a little bit like a D. It sounds a little bit like, are you saying something that sounds like, that, or maybe D, like D? I'm not doing that because my teeth, when I say D, come together, but they're not coming together with this sound, D, D. Teeth are separated, D. It's all the tongue hitting the alveolar ridge, D, just like that. So that's how you make that sound. Biddy. Biddy 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 biddy, dee 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 dee, just like that. It's a great trick. It'll work for all the R sounds in Japanese. Da, di, do, de, do. Now we're just going to talk about D. How do we remember D? Well, we have our cloak on the left, and then we have this longer stroke here, which is the second stroke. When we have Re, it's easy to think of the Grim Reaper, right? The Grim Reaper. So he has his cloak, and he also has his really long sickle. And we're emphasizing the long part of it because you see how much longer this one is. If we cut it in half, basically the second stroke is twice as long as the one over here in most ways of writing it. So we have this one, the cloak or the cape, and then the long sickle. So that's how we can remember D. Now let's get a few words, some spelling practice. As always, the meaning is not that important, but the practice is. So practice writing this. Diku happens to mean land. heri, which that word heri happens to mean helicopter. And nori. Nori, which is seaweed that you can eat. And that is D, on the first of these magical R sounds. Nariruredo, D. Try one more time. Biddy. Biddy, 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 D. D. You got it. The next hiragana we have is tsu, written like this. Tsu. So, Japanese happens to be a fairly sound-poor language, but it does have this sound, we call it a TS sound, that we don't have as a single sound in English. We have to make a combination of two letters, T and S, in order to make this sound for Japanese. But this sound, su, Japanese also has a sound su. If you're new to Japanese pronunciation, tsu and su, they might not sound very different. But we were just talking about L and R. L and R, we know when I say la or ra, they sound completely different in English. A Japanese person, if they haven't been exposed to English, hearing the difference between ra and la is extremely difficult. They won't know where to begin, even to say them, and they probably will not be able to recognize the difference until they get some more training in English. For you too, you hear tsu, and you might want to say su with just a simple S sound. Don't do that. So make this sound with a nice strong T sound in front of it. Tsu, tsu, every time, tsu. Really get that sound in there. Don't be lazy about it, because otherwise it might sound like su, which could make completely different words that you didn't intend to make. So very important to pronounce this as tsu. And what's an example of it? Tsunami, for example, which means a harbor wave. Tsu means harbor, and nami, which we'll learn how to spell later, means a wave. How can we remember it? Well, Japanese, as it is a relatively sound-poor language, something like just the sound of tu, they can't say very well. Tu, if they say the word tu, a Japanese person, if they don't know how to pronounce English right, they'll probably say tsu, to say tu, tsu. And, as luck would have it, if we complete it like that, now it's a tu. Isn't that great? Really convenient. So that's how we can remember tsu. As for some example words, we can do kutsu, which means shoes. Koitsu, which means this friggin' guy, this thing. And atsui, which means hot. Atsui. For the vowel sound u, let's work on a little bit of pronunciation. It's not quite like an English oo. That's a little bit too round sounding. And it's definitely not like a pretty Italian or Spanish or German oo. It's not like that really round sound. It's more like oo. A little bit kind of like the sound in book or something like that, but it's, well, do it one more time. Ooh, ooh. So you just make your mouth in the shape ooh, and that gives you the right sound. Not hard to make, especially for the English speaker, I think. Well, how do we write it? Came from that kanji, and it got simplified to look like that. Quite a bit simplified looking. So it has two parts. The first stroke is what we could really call it anything. Well, let's call it a puppy dog's tail. So there's a puppy's tail, and that's really easy. There's a puppy's tail. And what is the second part? Well, we just learned that. That is tsu, right? That's tsu. So we have a puppy dog's tail and tsu. So how could we remember this? Well, let's think of a couple of cities. Let's take a German one and an Italian one. So, a German city I can think of is Ulm, starts with an U, and then an Italian city, Udine. They both start with U. U. And the way we can remember these two cities, U is a tale of two cities. A tale of two cities. That's great. So, well, hopefully you'll be able to use that lovely trick to remember that. Let's spell a few words now. Uni. Utsu. Niao. Niao. And that's U. Chi. For chi, let's have the identifying word here be cheese, which is very easy. It's probably the first thing that comes to your mind anyway. And also, if you've been in Japan, you may know that the Japanese, when they take a picture, much like in English, we say cheese, they say cheese, and they say cheese, and it's just their way of saying cheese, of course, and it's adorable. So how do we write it? Well, we do this. One horizontal stroke like that, and then that's the second one. It has a couple parts here which are already familiar to us. We have our dagger, so let's draw out that dagger like that. So here's our dagger, and then we have what we thought of before as kind of a 2, right? Or the Roman numeral 2, or rather, excuse me, the Arabic numeral 2. So let us imagine we are taking out our dagger and we are cutting ourselves a piece of cheese with 2 swift strokes. This also has 2 strokes. Just like Zoro, or if you prefer Japanese version, Zatoichi, or some other samurai master. So that's how we can remember chi. As for the pronunciation, we have the sound chi. And when you say chi, you feel your tongue kind of, the muscles in your tongue kind of, they tense a little bit. We say chi. The tongue curls back a little. With chi, it's much more relaxed. The tongue is much more forward. Chi, it's a subtle distinction. It's not one you have to worry about a whole lot right now, but as you start to get better at conversing in Japanese, listen to the sound of chi and other similar sounds, and you'll be like, oh, it's not chi. It's not this chi. There's a lot of muscles tense for the English. Chi, it's a lot more relaxed sound. So let us spell a couple of words. Let us do tsuchi, nochi, chin, da. So here is da. And when we talked about di before, how do we get there? Bidi, di. For da, let's pronounce it, well, how about a word out there to my friends from New York. If you don't mind my terrible Brooklyn-style accent, if you imagine you say a word like better, it's better. Instead of saying better, better, da, da, da. So that's what I want you to get to, that da, da. As in di before, this is da. Okay, so this is what the hiragana looks like. Looks like that. So the first little piece that we have is our puppy dog's tail. So we have the puppy's tail, and then we have a vertical line, that's new, but then we have this tsu. We have our partial number 2. Tsu is still there. So da, what image is that? So da da da, rah rah rah, like on cheering at some kind of sporting event. So rah rah rah. So of course instead it would be da da da, because they'll all be Japanese fans. And why are they so happy? Well, of course, because it's Japan. The mascot is a puppy. Makes perfect sense. A little, cute little puppy, and the puppy has his puppy dog's tail, and it goes left and right, like that, right? So as the puppy is marching, leading the parade, it's go left and right, and then the crowd cheers 1, 2, da da da. 1, 2, da da da. Like that. So we have the, ring again, the puppy dog's tail, and then 1, and we continued it, it would be a 2. 1. So there's the 1, and there is the part of the 2. So puppy dog's tail, 1, 2, da da da. It's great, right? Let's spell some words. Hera. Dan. Hetsurao. Hetsurao. And in fact, hopefully you're getting used to my handwriting. Something particular about my handwriting on a board like this, which you're starting to notice, is that because I'm over here and I don't want to be completely in front of your view, I'm kind of at an angle which causes my letters to droop down. So this is maybe not exactly perfect. And something that I've noted elsewhere, but I'll repeat again, if you want to make your characters, whether they're kanji or they're hiragana, or any kind of kana, if you want them to look really good, they all fit pretty perfectly into a nice balanced square shape. Not a rectangle, but a square, exactly. So let me do them vertically this time, just to show you how that could be. Hetsurao, hetsurao, hetsurao. Just like that. So, a couple different ways to write it. And if you're getting used to my handwriting, like I mentioned, that's great. There's so many different styles of writing letters. Just like in English, we have, you have your different font types. Japanese has all those too. These are fairly standard ways of doing handwriting. I encourage you to follow models like this one. Otherwise, you'll develop your own particular handwriting style as you go. Now we have ta. So ta looks like this. Can you pick out the pieces on your own? If not, I can help you out a little bit. We have a dagger on the one side. There's our dagger. And then on the other side, we have a couple of combs. So there we go. Here is what we can imagine. Let us imagine that sitting on top of a dagger. So let's take our dagger, I'm going to invert it now. And now let's have a word that rhymes with top, or at least has a sound similar to top. Let's make it a top. Okay? So there's a top, and we can have it spinning around. And it's spinning on the top of the point of a dagger. And as it's doing that, combs are being jettisoned in all directions. Combs going out from the top that's spinning on top of the dagger. Awesome image, right? So that's how we remember ta. Top, dagger, and combs. Let's spell some words. Intai. Tako. Tachi. And that is ta. Now we have the hiragana sa. Sa, we write like this. There's our first stroke. There's our second stroke. And that's our third stroke. So 3 strokes. And let us think of a way that we can remember it. Well, we have our familiar dagger here, right? We have a dagger. And then we have what appears to be half of a comb. So remember we had ko before, which made up our comb. But now we only have half of it. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to have half a comb. So let's call this Instead, this thing, let's call this a hairpin. So this is now a hairpin. Well, what keyword can we use? Sa sounds a lot like sock. Let's imagine a lady of very questionable taste who puts a sock in her hair, and for a hairpin, she uses a dagger. So, just let that image really sink in, and you'll remember sa every time. Something that's worth mentioning too about the writing of this character, and usually in printed writing, we see it get joined together, and this red line here represents how it gets joined. And remember what I mentioned about the difference between the way that all Japanese writing came to being versus the way that our Roman letters came into being. Roman letters and Greek letters and Phoenician letters, all those were meant to be chiseled in rock primarily, and then all the handwriting stuff on paper came later. For the Japanese, before they had pens and pencils, they had ink brush dripping down onto paper. So when they did that, let's use this. So we had the first stroke, and they lift to the second stroke, and then coming over here, they maybe wouldn't lift quite as much, so the ink would dribble down and create a kind of a connection here. What should you do in your handwriting? Don't connect them. Why do I say it? Because you're going to see these connected like this all the time. Remember chi, by the way. Chi looks like this. That is connected in handwriting. This is not. It should not be connected. So these look similar. These confuse people a lot to begin with, so it's good to see the comparison. This is connected, and this is not in handwriting. And so when you write this a lot, it might, if you do it really quick, you might actually end up connecting them. It was kind of hard for me to do that there. Let me see if I can connect them. It's really easier for me to separate them, but if I write it really quickly like that, I can kind of force them to connect. But that's not as natural looking. This looks natural. As an example, think about the letter A. This is the one that I usually compare this to. If you write a letter A by hand, you'll probably write it like that. You know, a kind of semi-cursive letter A. How many people do you know who write their lowercase letter A's like that? There are a few, but not many. If you connect these two strokes for sa, it's kind of like doing an A like this. An A, when it's printed, always looks like that. It never looks like this. Equally, when you print a sa, it usually never looks like that. But when you write it by hand, it always looks like that. So that's the comparison I make with respect to our letters. Let us spell some words. Let us do Sara. And here is ksai, ksai. Oftentimes when the vowel u comes before an S sound, like in sa, and especially if the syllable, or rather the kana that comes after it, has a pitched accent on it, usually this u gets diminished to almost nothing. So this sounds a lot like an X. So it's kusai, but it sounds a lot like, if we write it in some kind of phonetic like this, it sounds like ksai. And by the way, it means it stinks, ksai. And one more, let us do kesa. And that is sa. The syllable ki came from that rather complicated looking kanji, but the hiragana is greatly simplified. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 strokes like that. So we have some familiar shapes here. Firstly, it looks a lot like sa, doesn't it? Just to remind you, sa looked like that. But we have an extra stroke now in ki. That first part, we called that a dagger before, but now that it's got an extra stroke in it, let's call it a sword, because it needs a sturdier hilt. And then we have the hairpin down here. So we have a sword and a hairpin. So imagine, if you will, the following. we have our samurai with his sword. And so here is part of the sword, which is very oddly shaped looking sword, but it looks like that. So there's our sword. And here is an object down here. Our keyword shall be key. Makes perfect sense. So he is taking his sword and he puts a key on a rock so he can make a hairpin for his beloved. Isn't that a nice sort of story, which sounds like it could be a real story? So just imagine our samurai, he is coming, he puts the key on the rock, and he goes, hey, ho! And he makes a lovely hairpin for his girlfriend. And that is how we can remember ki in that lovely and ridiculous way. Let us spell a word or two. Kiri. Iki. Aki. So some of these are actual words and parts of words, and it doesn't always matter. For now, it's just spelling practice, practice writing them. And one more thing, this hiragana, much like sa, you'll see get connected like this in printing. What should you do for your writing? Just do the black lines here, not that red connection. But it's good to know that you'll see it connected most of the time when it's printed. Congratulations on finishing lesson 2. These hiragana in particular look a lot like each other in some ways, which is why we have them. And there's some similarities like tsu and u, they have some similarities. Sa and chi, they kind of look like backwards versions of each other. Sa and ki, they look similar as well. So now these, instead of looking really similar, hopefully you have really clear images of why they're different. We've also been learning these hiragana in a very non-traditional order. This order is an order where we can build step by step using really helpful memory tricks to figure out how to build these piece by piece. However, we will eventually have to learn the proper hiragana order. Why? Because dictionaries for Japanese are in that order, much like we have our alphabetical order. So the order, it starts like this. A, ka, sa, ta. And there's a lot more that go to it, but these are the first 4. And now that we know this, I'll give you a little hint. We are going to put all of them to the tune of Frère Jacques. So Frère Jacques, dormez-vous, etc. So you may know that song. And so what we're going to do is just start it out. Akasata, akasata. And the rest we'll save for later.